And now it's time for Talking Trade with Sandi Siegel and Ken Wasylik, sponsored by the Wisconsin Center for Manufacturing and Productivity, Michael Best Strategies, and Carroll University.
All right, I'm going to go to Tim on this first and then everybody else chime in. Okay, again, you have this deep knowledge of China, and as you said, the tariffs on China aren't new, but they're changing. So, from your experience, is this necessary, and will the outcome actually change where manufacturing is done?
It already has. I think when the tariffs were put in place in this first administration, I think the initial reaction to the companies to the tariffs were that they started to try to find alternatives within the United States, and they found some, but that's not where they're getting their product from. They're getting it from Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. So it's like water. I always like the analogy of water. Water will find its way. If you put a dam here, water will find its way. People find their way. I mean, what's wonderful about the human race is we're very, very resourceful. So I think at the end of the day, I firmly believe that China adjusted. This is the other thing that people don't report. When those tariffs went up, do you think people stopped buying from China? No. What do you think the Chinese did? They dropped prices. They dropped prices because they could not have that kickback effect economically to those industries that were exporting to our country. So that's why I said the initial effects were really pretty rough the first 6 months. It took the Chinese suppliers a little bit of time to figure out where to price to keep supplying their customers here in the United States. It took some to find alternatives within the United States. And then over time, within a year to 18 months, they found other sources. So it's interesting. I think that's why tariffs in international trade and everything else is very dynamic. But just keep in mind water. It'll find its least resistant way, and people are resourceful, and they will find the product they need.
Okay, will there be true reshoring as some advocates of the tariffs say will happen? True reshoring back to the U.S.?
Yes and no.
Okay.
And that was the interesting part of the Reuters report that was here in Wisconsin last week. He was interviewing various manufacturers here in the state of Wisconsin, and it was interesting. Those that are very reliant on skilled labor said, it's not going to affect them whatsoever because they can't get the skilled labor. They're only going to ramp to a certain extent. Those that have modernized and really created things like robotics in their plants and those type, they can ramp. And that was the feedback he was getting from the various manufacturers in Wisconsin. Those that have kept up the pace of modernization of their plants here in Wisconsin, in our home base, they'll reap the benefits. And yes, the repatriation will happen. But it will be certain companies and certain industries that are not relying on skilled labor because, quite frankly, we still have a big problem here with skilled labor.
Okay. Well, Sandi, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just share some anecdotal things from our customers. So, one of the things I would point out, the new duties on China are different than the original duties put in 2019, which were called the 301 duties, and it was under a particular regulatory rule, the Section 301, and that had to be by investigation that China was in violation of certain things, and they were implemented, and there was a waiting period and an investigation phase. The new duties, which are currently been placed on China, Canada, and Mexico, are under a rule called IEEPA, which is International Emergency Economic. It is an action that the president can take without any approval by Congress. He can do them quickly. He can do them with no notice, and under the pretense of emergency. So both Canada and all three countries were based a lot on the fentanyl issue, and that was the emergency as well as some economic things. It's also the rule, if you will, the program that he wants to place duties on some of the other countries, and that is concerning to politicians whether or not that's lawful, and the rest of the world is ready to argue that. But in regards to China, we had the original duty, which is anywhere from 7.5% to 25%, and still in effect. While there were some exclusions, all the exclusions are gone, expired. Now the new duties started at 10% a few weeks ago. They've gone up to 20%, and so that's 20% on top of the 25%. And what I can tell you anecdotally is when they first went in 2019, nobody thought they were going to stick, including me. And so most people didn't look around, do much, and they swallowed hard and they passed on the cost to the extent they could to you and I and all the rest of the consumers. In some cases, they negotiated lower pricing with their vendors in China, so China did absorb some of it. And then they started, as they stuck, as you will, over the 4 or 5 years, they started looking for other places to manufacture, like Vietnam, which we saw a huge shift. But you talk to companies. I've sat on panels with someone from Kohler. I've sat on different industries. It's not that easy to move your supply chain, and you spend millions of dollars building these factories, special tooling, and it's an enormous expense. So people, it's depending on your industry, it's just not that easy to do that or worth it. And even now with 45% on China, I have some customers telling me it's still cheaper than trying to source it here in the U.S. And that's the reality. And lastly, again, to the point of some industries, there are certain types of knitting and fabric work done that is only done there. There are certain looms, certain things that, a big textile, wearing apparel industry that's really, again, just hasn't been able to be, sourced elsewhere. So that, it will be a while for some of these things, and people are trying to figure out how to best navigate that and so forth. So, but it's hitting people hard, and, in the most part, I spend a lot of time talking to customers, especially now. Are you passing it on? How are you dealing with your pricing? Everybody has really changed how they price things to their customers or do any kind of quote or bid, and everything is subject to change more so than ever. We do big furniture companies that send out catalogs, and their pricing isn't in place, and obviously it's changing. Who wants 25% added overnight? And you said make decisions to ship. It was on the water. It was gone. And that's some of the chaos of how quickly some of these duties have been imposed. Customers didn't have an option. And for the first time in any tariff I have ever seen, there is no ability whatsoever to get a refund. You cannot export the goods. You cannot destroy the goods. You cannot do anything to ever get the money refunded. So a lot more restrictive than it's ever been.
You've been listening to Talking Trade with Sandi Siegel and Ken Wasylik, sponsored by the Wisconsin Center for Manufacturing and Productivity, Michael Best Strategies, and Carroll University.